Imagine you need to meet your friend at a restaurant tonight. You agree on a time and a place, write it down, and show up. There is no texting to say you are running late, no way to check if they have already arrived, no Google Maps to guide you there. You simply show up at the agreed time and hope they do too. For most of human history, this is how every single plan worked. And somehow, it worked. There was a time, not very long ago, when the average person woke up in the morning with no notifications waiting for them. No messages, no emails, no news alerts. Just the morning, just silence, and whatever was happening right in front of them. If you were born after 1995, that world is almost impossible to imagine. But it existed. And the people who lived in it were not waiting around desperately for something to be invented. They were fully alive, fully present, and completely unaware of what they were about to lose. Before mobile phones, your home had one telephone, a landline sitting in the kitchen or the hallway attached to the wall by a cord. If you were on the phone, you were physically tethered to that spot. You could not walk to another room or pace around the house. You stood there and you talked, and when the conversation was over, you put the receiver down and the connection was simply gone. If someone called and you were not home, they got nothing. No voicemail in the early days, no message, no notification. They would try again later, and if they never managed to reach you, the conversation simply never happened. Plans fell apart, people lost touch, and somehow life continued without the constant anxiety of being unreachable. Making plans required a kind of commitment that simply does not exist anymore. If you arranged to meet someone on Saturday at 2 in the afternoon outside the cinema, that plan was fixed. There was no rescheduling at the last minute, no quick text to say you were running 20 minutes late, no option to cancel from the comfort of your sofa. You were there at 2, or you were not there at all. And if you were not there, the other person waited, looked around, and eventually went home. The friendship quietly absorbed the disappointment, and life moved on. This created a completely different relationship with time and with your own word. Being punctual was not just polite, it was necessary, because your promise to be somewhere at a specific moment was the only thread holding the plan together. Getting lost was simply a normal part of navigating the world. Before GPS and Google Maps, before the ability to check your precise location at any moment, traveling through an unfamiliar city was a genuine adventure with no guaranteed outcome. You bought a physical map, the kind folded into a small square that never folded back the same way twice, and you studied it before you left. You tried to memorize the key turns and the landmarks, and then you drove and hoped for the best. When you got lost, and you often did, you pulled over and asked a stranger for directions. You had a real conversation with someone you had never met and would never see again. They pointed down the road and described turnings by landmarks, the church on the left, the petrol station on the right. And you held all of it in your head and tried to piece together the route as you went. Sometimes you made it, sometimes you got more lost. Either way, you figured it out, and the figuring out was part of the experience. There was no way to look anything up instantly. If you wanted to know a fact, you thought hard about whether you already knew it, asked someone nearby who might know, or went to a library. Libraries were not dusty places people visited reluctantly. They were places people genuinely needed, filled with information that existed nowhere else in a form ordinary people could access. The knowledge you could not find in your own memory or in the people around you simply did not exist for you in that moment. And rather than being a crisis, it was just the honest shape of what you knew. Boredom was profound and unavoidable in a way that is almost impossible to recreate today. If you were waiting for a bus with nothing in your pocket, you waited. You watched the street, observed the people around you, and let your mind wander without direction or purpose. Psychologists now believe this kind of unstructured mental rest, the genuine boredom with nothing to fill it, is when some of the brain's most creative and important work actually happens. The daydream that becomes an idea. The quiet moment that becomes a decision. The wandering thought that eventually becomes something real. Children spent enormous amounts of time outside, not because parents forced them, but because outside was simply where life happened. Friends were found by going to find them, knocking on doors and shouting up at windows, and your entire social world existed in physical space with natural edges and boundaries. When you came home in the evening, that world stopped. It waited for you until tomorrow. Photographs were precious in a way they can genuinely never be again. You had a roll of film with perhaps 24 exposures, meaning 24 photographs to document an entire holiday or an entire year. You thought carefully about each one. considered whether the moment was worth one of your limited frames, and pressed the shutter with genuine intention. Then you sent the film away to be developed and waited 2 weeks to discover what you had actually captured. The results were sometimes blurry, sometimes poorly lit, sometimes a photograph of someone with their eyes closed. You kept them anyway, put them in albums, and took them out on specific occasions to remember specific things. They were rare and deliberate documents of real moments that had been carefully chosen. Relationships formed at a pace that allowed them to develop real depth. If you liked someone, you had to find the courage to tell them in person, over the phone, or in a letter written by hand and sent by post. A letter could take several days to arrive, and the reply might take another week, meaning the entire back and forth of early romance could unfold over months of handwritten pages. People kept those letters, tied them in ribbon, stored them in boxes for decades because each one had been written with care and every sentence had been genuinely meant. Music required patience and a kind of active participation that streaming has made completely unnecessary. You heard a song on the radio, and if you were not ready to record it, you missed it entirely. There was no rewinding, no searching for it online, no listening on demand. You held a cassette recorder up to the speaker and hoped the presenter would stop talking before the song ended. When you bought an album, you listened to the whole thing in the order the artist had chosen, and in doing so, you discovered songs you never would have selected yourself that became some of your most loved. Television programs were broadcast at fixed times, and if you missed them, you simply missed them. There was no catch-up service, no streaming platform, no ability to pause or rewind. The entire country watched the same programs at the same moment, and the following morning, everyone had seen the same thing, which gave conversation a shared foundation that is very difficult to replicate today when everyone is watching something different at a different time. News arrived once in the morning with the newspaper, and once in the evening with the broadcast, reported by people who had spent the entire day verifying what had actually happened before telling anyone about it. There was no breaking news every few minutes, no constant scroll of opinion and speculation, no algorithm feeding you the most outrage-inducing version of every story. Things happened in the world, and then, at a reasonable interval, you found out about them. And then in the early 1990s, mobile phones began to appear. At first they were enormous, expensive, and carried only by people who genuinely needed to be reached urgently. Nobody imagined they would become something every human being on Earth would carry everywhere, sleep beside every night, and instinctively reach for before they had even finished the process of waking up. By 2007, when the first iPhone arrived, everything changed permanently and irreversibly. The phone became a camera, a map, a library, a television, a newspaper, a music player, a social space, a shop, a bank, an alarm clock, and a calendar all at once. It became, quietly and completely, the primary location where modern life takes place. The world before that device feels almost mythological now. Slower and quieter, more uncertain and more inconvenient. More dependent on memory and patience and commitment and the willingness to be genuinely lost for a while before finding your way back. People were not happier or healthier or more virtuous simply because they had no smartphones. But they were more present because the present moment was genuinely the only place available to them. There was nowhere else to be,